Hello, and welcome to Higher Voltage, a podcast about higher education that explores what's working, what's not, and what needs to change in higher ed marketing and administration. I'm your host, Kevin Tyler. Okay, so on today's episode of Higher Voltage, I am so pleased to have one of my good friends, fellow troublemaker, Eddie Francis. Eddie Francis is a brand strategy consultant, speaker, and award-winning broadcaster who led marketing and communications at Southern University at New Orleans, Paul Quinn College, and Dillard University. He was nominated twice for the AMA Foundation Higher Education Marketer of the Year and served as a member of the planning committee for the American Marketing Association's Higher Ed Symposium. His podcast, I Want to Work There, focuses on employer branding at colleges and universities. Eddie, my dude, thank you for joining me on Higher Voltage today.
What's up, brother? How you doing, man?
I'm always better when you're around, sir.
Check is in the mail, kid. Check is in the mail.
I see this is going to be a comedy show, so I'll forget. Well, first of all, I'm excited to see you. I always love talking to you. But what we are here to talk about, this idea of employer branding, is one of the things that has just kind of been kind of a glaring omission in the ways that higher education has marketed itself, at least since I've been in the business. And that's been, it feels like 1,000 years. But ever since I've started, I've never had a conversation about like how we start to talk about employer branding in higher ed. And so I'm really glad to have this conversation with you, especially as we know more stories are going to be required for institutions to recruit the types of people that they're after. And that includes the people who work there. Before we get into like the nuts and bolts of what this could look like, I'm wondering if you might be able to set the table for our listeners about just like what you see employer branding as being in the space.
So there are three things that I look at: talent attraction, talent experience, talent retention. Those are three major areas that higher ed needs to take much more seriously. And as a definition, I would say employer branding is any organization's distinctive features that identify them as an employer of choice, not only to potential employees, but also, as you mentioned, to current employees, because we worry so much about getting the great talent onto the campus. And then it's not a problem until it's a problem. Then one day somebody goes, wait a minute, we're losing people and we don't know why we're losing them. We don't know why we're losing them at this rate. So being able to retain that talent is a major part of employer branding as well. One of the things that I really looked into at my last stop was, how do we market to ourselves? And I think that employer branding is the next big thing in marketing when it comes to a marketing strategy in higher ed. Simply put, Kevin, to think of it this way, colleges want high student satisfaction, right? Well, who's going to deliver it? So that's the question that we have to answer. And at the end of the day, what colleges and universities really need to think about is they need to think about attracting and retaining leaders who are going to educate, train, and guide our next generation of leaders. And everybody who works on a campus or everybody who works remotely, they are a leader. Because I think with higher ed, that's our charge, from the president to the facilities people, to the deans, to the directors on campuses. Everybody has a pretty significant leadership role, I think. And so I think that's how employer branding, I think that's how it looks in higher ed.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So we've had conversations about, the Great Resignation.
Mm-hmm.
People, it's not an unfamiliar idea, right? We lived through several years of people talking about the Great Resignation and how hard it hit higher ed specifically. And a lot of the conversations around that had to do with, pay, right? That was obviously an important point. But part of the other part of that conversation was about culture, and that people can't pay bills with a mission, right? So there was a study that was done by EAB in August of last year that found that approximately 57% of higher education employees plan to job hunt this year. And so I'm wondering, outside of the salary part, how can higher education create workplace cultures that not only attract talent but also retains it?
Here are a couple of the numbers that probably don't inspire the most confidence, but
Right.
Coupa HR, they do their annual higher education employee retention survey. And so their last one was in September of 23. And a couple of the numbers that stood out to me, 61% of the people who responded to that survey were looking to move away from higher ed to the private sector. 61%. 49%, they were looking to work at an organization outside of higher ed. And so I think the word here that you included in your question is the word that is incredibly important, and that is culture. And so I always say this, let's look at a college campus as a small city, right? And some of them are actually the size of cities.
Right.
And so when you look at that, you need your mayor, the president, or the chancellor. And that person, whether they like it or not, or whether they realize it or not, they are going to set a tone for culture on that campus, right? And then you have your policymakers. You have all these people, the cabinet, and honestly, to some degree, your marketing people and your comms people are kind of included in that too, I would say. And then you have your operators around campus. So you have these three levels of people: the mayor, the policymakers, and of course, let's include the policymaker, the faculty senate, and all these other folks, and then your operators. Ultimately, what this small city needs is it needs a bunch of citizens that are going to come in and cultivate a productive culture. And they are not only going to cultivate this productive culture for the sake of attracting and retaining students, but they're going to do it for their colleagues as well. And so what higher ed needs to figure out, any college and university, they need to figure out what the culture of that city is going to look like. The big issue that I look at a lot of times is that cynicism sets in when people feel like they have no work-life balance. Of course, we know pay is an issue around a lot of colleges and universities, but here's the other thing, and this is a big thing: psychological safety. Working on a campus, that is a big issue. And you and I know that Kevin McClure is somebody who has been working on this. He was actually a guest on my podcast talking about caring universities.
Yes.
And one of the things that he mentioned when I talked to him was this attitude of scarcity that higher ed has. And so he told the story, and he didn't tell the story, but he made this commentary about what happens when people ask for advancement or when they ask for higher pay. And this happened to me. My first job in higher ed, I'm getting paid, this is public information. I was getting paid $45,000 to be a PR director, and I was a one-man show. And so I'm doing about 5 to 10 people's jobs. And oh, by the way, I was doing sports information as well. And so I was doing all these different people's jobs. And I went to my boss at the time and said, hey, listen, I'm having a hard time living on 45 grand. So what do I need to do to get a raise? And it was treated as a punchline. It was just like, well, why do you expect that? What are you, crazy? No, that's not how this works. You don't get increases in pay. So it was like, in Kevin's words in the podcast that where I interviewed him, you're made to feel foolish for asking for things. And so higher ed has got to address that culture. And higher ed has got to address this overall deficit mindset that it tends to work from, especially when it comes to working with employees. And even if you have colleges and universities right now that are saying, oh, well, yeah, the Great Resignation, we had a really big dip in our applications, but we've had an increase in the applications over the past year or so. Well, even if you've had an increase in applications, my question to you is, as an institution, is it the quality that you need in these applications? Or do you just have 100 people who applied and you're just going to stick a mirror under their nose to see if they're breathing?
Right.
What we got here? What we got? What are we working with, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think to really attract and retain this talent so that there is a great talent experience, people, number one, have to know that there is some return on investment to their dedication to that institution, right? I think that comes in a form of, and let's throw money out of the window right now.
Sure,
I think
sure.
that comes in a form of professional development, advancement opportunities, rewards, perks, and then also clearly and consistently communicating to the employees the value of that experience being there. I think another thing and this might be two bad words that a lot of people don't want to talk about, Kevin, but leadership development on campuses. And that includes the presidents. Like, I'm not going to be shy about this. There are some people who have gotten titles and they're not leaders.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so, when you have someone who is abusive to people, they are really taking away people's psychological safety. That is not a place anybody wants to work, right? You're getting people who are going to want to work there for maybe 1 or 2 years, and they're going to want to bounce to the next thing. So you're renting people, and that's costing the institution a little bit more money than they realize. So at the end of the day, I think to really put together a culture where people want to work at a college or university, we need leaders, and not just the presidents, but the administrators, other administrators, to realize, and I would also throw in the board, that higher ed is a people business, Higher ed is a people business. So the deans, the department chairs, the directors, the VPs, they have got to have strong people skills to attract and retain and to make sure that people have a great experience. And here's one more thing, Kev. Gen Z. They are now our employees. Mm-hmm. And they see this game a lot differently than even millennials do, definitely differently than Gen Xers, definitely differently than baby boomers. They are into growth mindset. They are into vulnerability. They want leaders to be the people who they say they are. They want all of that. And so I think that if folks are going to have a culture on campus that is attractive, then a big part of establishing that employer brand is to make sure that faculty and staff have some return on investment on the dedication that they are bringing to the table.
I think that makes a whole lot of sense. And I'll be the first to say that I am not a member of Gen Z by far, but those are the things I want in a leader too, right? I mean, the currency that we have now and what leadership looks like is different than what it used to be. And we are inviting people into a community that exists to serve others. And if it feels toxic, then I don't want to serve anybody.
No.
If it feels like too oppressive, I don't want to do what I'm supposed to be doing. And I'll go find something that it fits my philosophies around life and work a bit more if you can't deliver it. And I think that I get that.
Yeah. And I mean, in leadership, Kevin, leadership models have changed so drastically over the past 20 years even. I was at a conference once, and it was actually back in February. I was at this conference. It was a fraternity and sorority life conference. And there was a speaker who was asking, what marks the different generations? There were maybe about 5 Gen Xers in the room. And so it was a room full of Gen Zers. But there were about 5 Gen Xers, I think maybe 1 baby boomer in the room. And when they got to Gen X, I raised my hand and I said, power. Gen X was all about power. It was about authority. We wanted the power. We wanted status. We wanted all of this stuff. And some of the other Gen Xers didn't like my answer too much. But think about who our role models were. Think about what was happening when we were growing up, right? You had Reaganomics, you had the Berlin Wall coming down, you had all this other stuff, and a certain person who ran for president and became president, he was the hot talk when in the 80s. And people were like, oh, yeah, I want to be like him. He looks like he has all the money. So a lot of us drag that attitude into leadership. A lot of us drag that attitude in where we said, well, I have the title. Why are you asking me questions? Go sit down somewhere, right? That has changed. And that is not going to work anymore in higher ed because people are keenly aware. And a lot of us in Gen X have said, no, that may be what we grew up with, but it wasn't cool. And honestly, it drove me crazy. And oh, by the way, as a Black man, I was a have-not. So I want a different experience than the experience I saw a lot of times. Mm-hmm. And I do think that is why boards, I think presidents, I think administrators, they have to be very much aware of how they lead on these campuses because that is going to determine how they are branded as an employer of choice. And it's going to determine the quality of candidates. Is going to determine, or has been determining, how long people stick around. And we saw what happened with the Great Resignation. Mm-hmm. It was not hard for people to opt out of higher education. Right. So unfortunately, I think there's more where that came from. But I do think that a big part of colleges and universities putting together an attractive employer brand is to really, really pay close attention to how campuses are led.
Mm-hmm. And let's be clear, like, even though that there are thousands of higher ed institutions in the country,
Mm-hmm.
it's a fairly insular industry in that, just like the student experience spreads like wildfire throughout the industry, the employee experience does too.
Oh,
And
yeah.
you hear, oh, girl, it's not, you don't want to work over here.
Absolutely.
And that, it just amplifies the problems that you might have on your campus if you're not taking care of the people who are delivering your promise every single day.
But you know what? People aren't even paying attention to that. People aren't even paying attention. So we have administrators who aren't even paying attention to the Facebook chatter, right? So you have people on Facebook who are writing their little Facebook dissertations about why they will not work at a certain campus or a certain type of institution anymore. They are naming names. They are going to Glassdoor. They're going to Indeed. They're going in places that higher ed is not going to figure out what the employee experience is like, and to figure out, okay, wait a minute, my competitor across town is not having a whole lot of luck with employees. So look at the reviews. If your competitors' employee reviews are not great, then go in the other direction, man. Don't sit there. And you know what happens? Because I've heard this before. What happens is, actually, one institution, there was this disgruntled employee who went out and put a bunch of stuff out there. It was dismissed. Oh, they're disgruntled, blah, blah, blah. They just don't like it because they didn't get promoted, or, or the term that people like to use, oh, they're just crazy, right? And they'll say that type of stuff. Well, that person may be quote unquote crazy, or that person may be disgruntled, or whatever it is you want to call them, but they can still make noise, and it's noise you're not going to like. And in one situation, someone decided to sue the university where I was working. It went to court. It got into the media, and this person was dismissed as quote unquote crazy, but they still made noise. Mm-hmm. And the public attitude became, and I was having to work the PR on this thing. And so the public attitude became, well, maybe they're not telling the exact truth, but something is there. Mm-hmm. And that's the part that's damaging to the reputation of an institution as an employer of choice. For someone to say, well, maybe what they're saying isn't completely true, but something is there. That something is their part, even that part is damaging to the reputation. So that's the kind of stuff that institutions really, really need to pay attention to. They need to pay attention to what the reputational risks are, which I would say, even if you have to let someone go, even if there's an involuntary separation, you still want to monitor how that person is let go. Mm-hmm. And so the way people leave is the way they're going to communicate. Right. And so, yeah, I really think that colleges and universities would do well to really figure out how to monitor those spaces that they don't think matter that much.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. While you were talking, what came to mind was the story of Dr. Bonnie Candia Bailey at Lincoln University, who had a trail of complaints about her work experience there and ended up taking her own life as a result of there not being any action. And I think we see these kind of like seemingly disconnected stories of employee experience that can either result in what you've just laid out or something far worse, like Dr. Bonnie's case, whatever it is. But like, that's about the employee experience and about some other things, right? When there's, that level of reaction, but it's not nothing, right? I don't know the details of that story, but something was going on. And
Exactly.
Those kinds of stories can prevent other really qualified candidates from being on a campus that they could provide great value to students.
I think that is a really unfortunate example because, again, there's something. I mean, that can't be nothing. That can't be all her. And the latest news is that president was reinstated and the board of curators, quote unquote, found no wrongdoing. Well, even so, now there's a scarlet letter on that place.
Exactly.
And so I don't know how many of the comments you saw, but I kept reading comment after comment from people saying, I'm triggered. All the stuff that she wrote in her email, the stuff that was reported, that happened to me. Mm-hmm. And honestly, I personally was triggered, Kevin. I mean, I read the email content that was reported and I said, I
Yes.
almost said this exact stuff to people at times,
Yeah.
that it was, yeah, well, I'm trying to do this. I'm trying to make sure that this is a great work experience for me and for you. But you keep throwing it in my face.
Mm-hmm.
There was one thing she wrote in one of her emails. Or there was something that she was reported to have said to a friend where she said, I'm just trying to make it through.
Mm-hmm.
How many people have said that? How many times have people said that in a toxic work environment? I'm just trying to make it through. So unfortunately for the institution, and unfortunately for the students at the end of the day, there's now a scarlet letter on that place. And so I can only hope that at some point, something is going to work out in favor of the institution itself, but they have some really serious decisions to make, especially where it concerns employee satisfaction,
Right.
especially where it concerns potential candidates for jobs over there, and especially where it concerns how people leave.
Higher ed is facing headwinds like never before. And with internal teams leaner than ever, you need outside help that knows what you do and can plug into your operations to help in any way you need. From enrollment analysis and support, to bold, brand-driven creative and elite user-focused strategies, Electric Kite can help. So yeah, it's getting windy out there. But that's okay, because kites rise against the wind. Visit electrickite.com to learn more.
I, worked at lots of agencies in the higher ed marketing space, and feels like I've worked on thousands and thousands of like student recruitment campaign.
Mm-hmm.
So often we hear about what an institution promises its students, but very little about what that same institution promises to its faculty and staff and administration.
Mm-hmm.
Why does it seem like that group, faculty, staff, administration, et cetera, are so glaringly missing from not just the attraction conversation, but also the retention conversation?
Well, first of all, a lot of schools aren't even thinking about retention. That's one reason. They aren't even thinking about it because so many colleges and universities have a next man up attitude. Mm-hmm. So what it is it's like so-and-so left, fine, go ahead and hire the next person.
Yeah.
I remember a good friend of mine made this comment once that he was trying to hire some folks and he got really frustrated, and understandably so, because he was looking at an applicant pool that just wasn't working in his favor. And what he said is not unique. I mean, I've heard this as a recruiter. I heard this, I don't know how many times out of frustrated hiring managers. But at some point, he says something that every frustrated hiring manager says. He goes, I just need a warm body in here. And I'm sitting there going, no, you don't need a warm body, because that's part of the problem.
Right.
So in higher education, the difference is, colleges and universities are mission driven. So you need people in there who may not believe in the mission of the institution, but they do believe in the mission of higher education.
Right.
You need people who are there because they want to be there. And again, it's a people business. And one of the differences here, if you just think in terms of customer dynamics, the big difference in higher education is that your customers are always around you. So they live on campus, they are taking courses, they are constantly there, even in a remote environment. The customer is always there. They are not going anywhere. And so when you take a look at institutions really struggling with retention, I think part of it, and this is another thing that's part of Kevin McClure's commentary, there's so much attention paid to satisfying the student that folks forget that there's somebody serving the student.
Right.
I don't think there's any area where that is more evident than in student affairs, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, student affairs, God bless them, because there are people in student affairs working for peanuts, yet they have to be on hand and they have to go to these students and they have to serve the student 24/7. They have to be on call. They have to be on campus from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. I mean, on a daily basis. Goodness gracious, student affairs and new student orientation and getting ready for the holidays, moving them out, then moving them back in and doing all of this stuff. And these people, a lot of them can barely put food on the table, some of them. I actually met someone who worked in student affairs somewhere. He had just, this guy had just gotten an Ivy League degree. And he was passionate about student affairs. And he was really happy to be at the college where he was working. And after I talked to him, somebody says, yeah, he's really going through it. And I said, really? He looked happy to me. And they went, well, he has to put a face on because he's student affairs. And that's kind of that's how he's trained, to have a face on all the time. I found out that the guy didn't have any furniture in his apartment. He barely had any food in the table, in his refrigerator. I mean, he was constantly sick. And there were just all of these issues swirling around. And he was just so committed to the mission, so committed. And yet I'm sitting there going, well, can they at least boost his pay a little bit so he can afford some food or something? I was like, this doesn't compute. This does not compute for him to be so dedicated. And it feels like he's being punished for his dedication, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think the most damning thing about this is that when you talk about talent attraction and talent retention, you're talking about business, right? You're talking about business initiatives there. The most important resource, we say this all the time, is the human resource. In every single industry, people say the most important resource is the human resource, which I'm starting to laugh now when people say that.
Right.
And if the most important resource that is making your business run is the human resource, then the problem that higher ed seems to have is that higher ed doesn't understand the cost of doing business in the first place. That is what troubles me, because to me, what you have is the tail wagging the dog. You have all of these people, all these colleges and universities that are doing any and everything possible to get as many students on campus as possible, but they are not well staffed. So something's got to give. You got to figure out which one you want first. You either want the people to do it and you're going to pay them well, or you're going to make sure they are not overwhelmed constantly, right? I worked at 3 HBCUs, the home of places where everybody does at least 5 to 10 jobs. And you're sitting there like, yo, man, I mean, I'm tired. I'm just tired. Every time you talk to people, it's like, hey, man, how's it going? You're at home coming, having a good time. It's like, how you doing? I'm tired. And so, but something's got to give. Higher ed has got to understand the cost of doing business. And I think higher ed has got to really think about how to invest more into the most important resource, the human resource.
So are there colleges that you can point to, or universities that you can point to, who are doing this well, or at least trying to in a respectable way?
I have seen an uptick in institutions that are trying to put sound employer branding in place. I will give a shout out to your alma mater, to Pitt, because I actually took a look at their talent attraction website, and I was like, man, this is really cool. They have great images. They present well in terms of mission and vision and values. And so I would be eager to see how Pitt is carrying that throughout campus behind the great website.
That's a conversation for another day.
Yeah. And it always is. One thing I will say about this before I go on, one thing I will say about the employer branding conversation is people should not expect paradise.
Right.
Don't expect it to be perfect, and don't expect it to be like the happiest place on earth, because that's not realistic. I don't think 100% employee happiness is what you're looking at. You do want to get a high rate of employee satisfaction. And there's a difference between the two. If people get upset, but they say, well, you know what? I'm really upset by this decision that the president made, but this is still a great place to work.
Right.
I mean, that's really the most you can hope for. Or if people say, I learned a lot here, I was able to advance here, I was able to make a good wage here, or this prepared me for my next step. If that is what you get, then I think that's a winner. So yeah, let's not look for paradise. But I will say also, I do know that a couple of institutions have beefed up as far as including HR communication specialists. Saginaw Valley State is one, Iowa, UMass Amherst or institutions that I know of. And I know that there are way more, but those are the ones that come to mind. But Kevin, I would also say that any institution that really knows how to talk about the value of the work experience on campus or remotely. Any institution where the work of the faculty and staff are highlighted with a sense of intention, not just to throw a press release out there, but with some real intention to really reflect the values and the mission and the brand of the institution. And then I would say any institution is doing a good job if not only they collect employee data, but they do something with the employee data. So
Okay.
I think that's really important, because if you really, really want to hack off faculty and staff, go ahead and give them a survey and don't do anything with their feedback.
Right.
That is a really good way to
Exactly right.
not get buy-in, obviously, but you're definitely going to get some buy-out, because people get really upset. And these are educators, right? These are people in the education sector. So when you collect data, they want to know what's happening with the data.
Right.
And they want to see the results of it. So any institution that collects employee data and they actually do something with it and they communicate to the faculty and staff, hey, you said this, we're doing that. You said you don't like this, we are going to work on correcting it this way. You said you love this, we're going to do more of that. And so I think, if not for solid examples, there are definitely those institutions that really do care. They show they care about their employees. And I would say those institutions are definitely probably doing pretty well as far as having compelling, attractive employer brands.
It's hard being a college or university president. Higher education leaders face tough choices, and the best path forward isn't always clear. Neither is how to communicate about the choices that an institution has to make. Trusted Voices explores the complex intersection of leadership and communication. Each episode, hosts Teresa Valerio Parrott and Aaron Hennessy chat with university presidents, industry thought leaders, and each other about the latest news in the industry and the challenges and opportunities facing those in the most visible roles in higher ed. Season 2 of Trusted Voices kicked off with Rice University President Reginald DeRoche joining Teresa and Aaron to discuss the importance of openness and how to embrace politics at one of the most prestigious universities in the country. And more great guests and critical conversations lie in store. Listen to Trusted Voices on the Volt Podcast Network, wherever you get your podcasts.
So I appreciate the examples you just provided. Those feel like inside out. Like if I'm already on a campus working, these are the things I can look to see, kind of get a temperature about how the employer branding conversation is going on my campus.
Yeah.
What kinds of things would you recommend people to look for who are looking to join a campus? What are the signs, the red flags and the green flags that people might look to understand what the employee experience might look like?
Yeah, I can tell you one thing that people are already doing. Again, this is something that administrations are not paying attention to. But job seekers always go to places like Glassdoor, Indeed, Salary.com. Oh, Salary.com, boy. People love going to Salary.com.
High traffic.
And you can tell when somebody goes to that website, because you're sitting there going, okay, this is the pay. And they're like, well, I was thinking more like, it's like, oh, okay, they know how much they're worth. Good job. And so, and let me tell you, I actually had on my team, the last stop I was at, I had somebody on my team who negotiated really high, and I loved her for it. I mean, I didn't have the money to pay her as much as she wanted, but I said, okay, she really values herself, which means she's a good one, and I really need her on the team. So, but I would say one thing that people should look for in terms of, let's start with red flags. I mean, red flags, either chatter or no chatter at all from the faculty and staff. Because I think no chatter at all is just as much a red flag as chatter. The other thing is read up on the leaders, read up on the president, take a look at who's on the board. Hey, take a look at all of those people. Of course, you can always, if they can visit the campus, if you are in a position to visit the brick and mortar space, I would definitely say go take a look at it. Take a look at mission, whether or not your personal mission aligns with the mission of the institution. The other thing, I am really big on core values. I am really big on core values. I think an institution really should publicize their core values, because your institutional core values determine how you behave on campus. It determines the kinds of decisions that you make. It determines how you conduct business. It determines how you treat people, how you treat the students, how you treat the employee. It determines all of that. And so if I were looking for a job, I would take a look at what the institutional core values are. And if the institution doesn't have core values, I would consider that something rather curious myself, right? And I think as far as green flags, I would say take a look at the students, because you do have those folks who can compartmentalize the employee experience, and they are saying, hey, listen, I don't need all the things. If I can be around some good students and they keep me energized and alive, then I'm fine with that. Mm-hmm. And so I would say if you see a student culture that seems healthy, then that's something to look out for. I think if you do have an institution that is not shy about saying, if you somehow get wind of something, because, faculty and staff talk. And so if you get wind of something where the institution admits that they made an error and they know and they are doing something to correct it, I would consider that a green flag, because that is an indication that they are communicating with the spirit of transparency. Mm-hmm. And I would consider that a good thing.
Agree with that.
Yeah, I definitely believe that. And then honestly, Kevin, let's not take away from the fact that if a campus does have a vibrant athletic life, if it does have a vibrant student life, if it's in the city that you want it to be in, and again, you can compartmentalize a lot of other things, then those are all some green flags as well for the institution to fit, the kind of person that you are. And it doesn't hurt. It really doesn't hurt for the institution to have some perks. It doesn't hurt at all, because, especially if they publicize them. I remember once I was asking at one of the institutions where I worked, I found out that there was this really cool tuition benefit that I could have used for my kid. And I said, well, wait, where's this information? They said, oh, we'll email it to you. And I said, well, no, why is it not on the website or someplace where I have access to this kind of information? Mm-hmm. So I would say, a green flag is being aware of what the perks are of working there. What are the benefits? All that cool stuff. That's the green flag material, because the institution, they're at least proud that they offer this to the employees. And that's something that I would consider a big plus too.
Before we go, I want to ask you the question that I ask every guest who joins me on Higher Voltage. I think, though, I'd like to change it just a touch through the lens of employer branding and employee experience. What do you think, through that lens, higher ed will look like in 5 or 10 years?
I'm concerned, honestly. I'm very concerned. And one of the reasons I'm so concerned is the short tenure of presidents.
Yep.
Unfortunately, when you have presidents with short tenures, what you're talking about is brand instability. And so what tends to happen is that you have this new president who comes in just because of Tuesday. They decide they want to change the tagline, or they decide that they want to do a whole new thing. And what that does, though, is that creates a lot of tension with the faculty and staff, because people may think, well, it's just a tagline. It doesn't mean anything. But making those kinds of changes are indications to me of bigger problems.
Right.
Because you pull the thread and you're going to find out, well, there's something else they want to change. There's something else they want to change. There's something else they want to change. Let's not even forget about people who come in and they probably know they're going to have a short tenure. They're probably choosing to have a short tenure. And so what they come in and do is they make it their little stepping stones of the next thing.
Exactly.
And faculty and staff aren't stupid. They're going to see that. They can hear it in everything the president says and does, unfortunately. And so with these shortened presidential tenures, you're also looking at poor leadership development on campus, because there's so much attention a lot of times to processes, to fundraising, to research, enrollment, all that good stuff, but not the people who make it happen.
Right.
So it turns into, what do I need to do right now? So unfortunately, I wish I had a great answer to this when it says, oh, higher ed is going to be great. And I don't know. I'm concerned, man. But here's what I think happens. I think institutions that do work on their employer brands, and they work on it very seriously, and they work on it with a sense of intention, and they don't work on it just to attract employees. They work on it because they want to provide a great experience and they want to retain these great employees. I think if they can put a strong brand in place, and the only way you're going to put a strong brand in place is if you have a strong culture. And so if they can put that strong brand in place, which is going to come from a strong culture, then I think what these institutions have an opportunity to do is they have an opportunity to have people who will come in and they're going to answer to the culture as opposed to the president coming in and wanting to change a whole bunch of stuff around because of their narcissistic pursuits. Right. So I think that's how a lot of institutions can safeguard. That strong brand, I think, is going to put the institution first and the leader really answering to the culture and the brand of the institution.
I think that makes a lot of sense. I think one of the things I often think about and also say out loud is that the brand is not just to attract the students. A strong brand also attracts leadership. It attracts faculty, all of these things. And so if we're not paying attention to the brand, then we're not going to only not get the students. We also won't get the people who are delivering the brand, right?
Absolutely.
Some of the other things that I think about that are kind of more tactical, I guess, are around like the experience of like quote unquote intake, right? When I'm applying to a school and they're talking about how innovative we are and how diverse they are, I'm going to expect that the application process, for instance, does not have me filling out my resume and then uploading my resume, or we're talking about how, or like entering my jobs in the past and then uploading the document as well. That doesn't feel innovative. If we are talking about an institution where they're talking about how fluent and diversity they are, then I'm going to expect certain things. And I'm going to expect to be asked what my preferred pronouns are, how I prefer to be addressed. There are these little indications that we can give people when we're trying to invite them into our community, that if we say this thing, then we've already set an expectation. And if we don't deliver against that expectation, then we are not who we say we are. And so all these things, like they get pieced together and people make assumptions and their perceptions get built from the things that we are putting out into the world. So to me, in 5 or 10 years, I hope that processes are smoothed out, that the language we use for attraction are actually replicated or reflected in the action of the experience. I think that those are really, really important things because people are paying attention to all of that stuff. You can't just throw words like innovative out into the world and not expect to be asked questions about that.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm glad you brought all of that up because I agree with that 100%, because I'm thinking about institutions where in a job description, it says things like, even though you may not feel as if you're qualified for this job, still apply because, and they give this language that's really empowering. It says, you know what? I really do believe that this is something I want to apply for. The long form job description that's a PDF and, must lift 30 pounds and, all this other stuff that's on it. Our good friend Jamie Hunt talks about that, the must lift 30 pounds thing. And it doesn't even pay attention to any sort of diversity of ability or anything like that. You're right. Those are also a bunch of things that colleges and universities need to pay attention to. But again, and I'm a 30,000 foot person. Again, I think from a 30,000 foot level, you get to that point if at the 30,000 foot level, you're looking at all the things that the data tell you have to change or all the things you have to keep doing. You do get to that point where you have job descriptions that are sensible. And I'm going to throw a really interesting one in here. If even you change the job descriptions so that even if it's someone who in a professional position doesn't have a bachelor's degree, if they're still a hell of a fundraiser, you consider that person.
Right.
And you make it part of their package that they can get a degree at that institution free. So you're right. There are so many little building blocks that do lead to creating great employer brand. And I do think that, again, from this 30,000 foot level, having the attitude of what do we need to do to make sure that we have a great student experience? Who are the leaders who are going to come in and help us educate, train, and guide the next leaders? Who are they? What do they look like? And what risk can we take to make sure we have the right people giving us what we need to get the highest student satisfaction?
Eddie Francis, I love hanging out with you. Great conversation. We will have links to some articles about employer branding that people might find helpful. Again, always a pleasure, Eddie. Thank you for this time.
Thanks a lot, man. Appreciate it. I always appreciate hanging out with you, Kev.
You too.
That's it for this week's episode of Higher Voltage. We'll be back soon with a new episode. And until then, you can find us on Twitter at Volt Higher Ed. And you can find me, Kevin Tyler, on Twitter at Kevin C. Tyler 2.